Please be advised, this podcast contains graphic audio and themes that may not be appropriate for all listeners.
When you kind of go back to the beginning of this litigation, I mean, it kept snowballing, and there were so many cases being filed because there was so much uncertainty as to what triggered the collapse and who exactly to blame. You start blaming everybody.
Jay Weaver is the Miami Herald's longtime federal courts reporter. The first lawsuit was filed the day of the collapse, and Weaver says it didn't take long for the situation to turn into something everyone had hoped to avoid.
Once you get past the engineers and the contractors and the developers and the town of Surfside and the condo association and the consultants, you start blaming your neighbor. I mean, there were certain families that were holding press conferences.
This spot is sacred. It is unacceptable that the last place my son was alive to be anything but a memorial.
This memorial should be a permanent reminder of what happened here, not at the park and not anywhere else, at 877 Collins Avenue.
We do not build over dead bodies.
Weaver lives close to Surfside, just like so many of the Herald's other reporters and editors. And as the case wore on for months, Weaver took walks to the scene as it went from search and rescue to demolition to empty lot.
I started to step away from the courtroom and step away from the lawyers and step away from all the kind of sterile litigation. I kept going back to the site, on my own to look through the chain link fence. This was kind of a symbolic burial ground. The DNA, the heirlooms, their beds, jewelry, all this stuff that had been buried there, all their cash, everything was gone.
Many of the people did not receive full bodies, only remains, and small remains at that. Most of their remains are right here on the site that you see behind us. That is their resting place. In Judaism, the body is sacred as well as the soul. If their bodies are there, they cannot be moved. They cannot be built upon.
They were going from the grieving to the blaming, and it was just escalating for a tragedy that perhaps could never have been avoided due to some sort of engineering or construction or development flaw, but nobody knew at the time.
But what they did know at the time, what they'd known from the very first court hearing, was that there was not enough money in this case.
Is there a separate insurer for the property, for the physical structure itself? And who is that carrier?
And we asked Your Honor, there's $30 million of property coverage through Great American Insurance Company.
Great American. Okay.
Day one in the legal process was July 1st, while the massive search and rescue operation was still in full swing, while the daily family briefings we heard in earlier episodes were still underway. The standing section was demolished days later, on the 4th of July. So there were no family members or survivors at this first hearing. It was just the judge and the lawyers starting to try to figure out how much money there was going to be to go around.
And is there any excess on top of that, or is that a primary policy?
That's the only coverage that we're aware of at the moment.
Okay, so you think there's at most $48 million of total coverage, both for the structure and liability?
That's right, Your Honor.
Okay, very good. So we've got, as I suspected, and maybe I hope I'm proven wrong and that there's more coverage to be found, it looks like for the property damage claims and the injury and death claims, there's going to be a total of $48 million, which will obviously be inadequate to compensate everyone fully to the extent of their harm.
So the judge decided he needed to appoint a mediator. And, he just assumed that this mediator would, play the role of a Moses and come in and kind of resolve all of this, and be a prophet of a kind. It didn't work out that way.
In fact, it was so bad that just days after the mediator started talking with the two sides, He told the judge he thought the divide was too deep. They would never be able to compromise. Some of the owners said the money from the building insurance and the sale of the land was just for them. On the other side, a group of hard-line relatives said the owners should get nothing or even be held personally liable for the 98 deaths because they failed to keep the building safe. When disasters struck, Champlain Towers South was facing a $15 million repair bill to comply with its 40-year recertification process. The condo association was going to assess the owners thousands of dollars each to pay for it. They had no choice. But not all of them were on board, as came out in that March hearing.
Some unit owners were going door by door telling the other owners not to pay for special assessments, which could have been a big contributing factor to this building collapse. They deserve nothing. The law is clear. The law states they may be liable, and there is no way around the law.
Still, a third group thought it was too soon to talk about a settlement at all. They wanted more time to figure out what had happened. The mediator told the judge that there was just no way forward.
He just thought that it was kind of an intractable problem that he would never be able to solve. Even through the fall and Christmas and the holidays, they still hadn't resolved all of this.
Judge Hansman had hoped to avoid dragged-out litigation. He wanted to get money to the homeowners quickly so they could try to move on. If they agreed to the settlement, he would protect them from liability for the deaths of their neighbors. But if they opted out, they were on their own. They might get nothing now and lose even more later. Hansman wanted to get to the death claims, which he thought would take even longer and be more difficult to sort out. But both sides dug in.
We lost more than property. We lost the ability to fall asleep, to socialize, to focus, to work, to have peace of mind, and to be optimistic about our futures and our families.
Deborah Soriano lived in Unit 1105. The night of the collapse, she had a party, and her friends had just left. Like many of her fellow owners, she felt like she was being punished for surviving.
What this tragedy did to me was actually made me realize how detached I am from the material side of it. I don't need my watch, my jewelry, or my possessions. I really just want my life back. I'm a small business owner who worked my whole life to give my kids an education and to be able to buy a piece of property where I could live for the rest of my life without having to stress about my future. Therefore, my peace of mind is gone. I'm officially homeless, and I have no idea how I will ever purchase a home again. When did the victims turn into criminals? What was the turning point of this horrible tragedy? I was actually awake when it all happened, and thank God I was able to somehow escape from the 11th floor. It was a real miracle to be alive. What have we really done wrong? None of us in that building would ever put our lives or their families in any type of danger. I will be 60 years old, and this matter has exhausted me. If we were younger and we had unlimited funds, I would fight until I couldn't fight anymore. But at this age, who wants to take the risk of being left with nothing? Where are we all going with this settlement? The wrongful death claimants deserve to get everything they can get. I don't believe any of our survivors disagree with that. But why should it be taken from us? What was our crime? What was our real crime? None of us can even begin to imagine what they're going through by losing family members or loved ones in this collapse. If we are living a horror story, their horror story has been magnified. But with all due respect to everyone, we need the help.